She was the most popular girl in school, and for a while she couldn't find anyone to match her beauty and excitement. He was striking and memorable, and just her type.
He was nothing like the other guys we grew up around.
Rochester came to me in a dark time in my life.
They were destined to be together.
This is Kashish Singh with Berth of a Tragedy.
911, what's your emergency? Officer, there's a building on fire. I don't know how it started, but it's in Thornfield, and it's one of the oldest buildings out here, and I'm worried. I see a woman on top of it. Please calm down. Tell me what is happening clearly. Why are you ruining my life?
It all began on the sunny beaches of Jamaica, a place where people come to find romance and where relationships bloom. This is the story of a woman whose unexpected past turned her future upside down.
No one had any idea that things would turn out this way.
I knew them both from the beginning. They were perfect for each other.
Bertha Mason and Edward Rochester met near the blue waters of Jamaica, where after Rochester's father, a wealthy landowner, introduced them, an eager young man looking for love, and a stunning young woman who was ready to find her first love. But how did this fairy tale burst into flames?
Everyone knew that Rochester was the most eligible bachelor. I mean, he was bold, he had striking eyes, he had a jaw that could cut through glass, and his eyebrows, oh, don't even get me started on his eyebrows, excuse my slang, but they were, like the kids say, on fleek. But what happened? I mean, no one saw it coming.
Did you detect an air of anything suspicious at all before the wedding?
No, to me they seemed amazing. Everyone was super jealous. They looked so happy together.
Was there any tension or drama at the wedding? Did anything seem off at all?
No, it was a simple, intimate wedding. Our parents were marrying off their only daughter, so everything had to be perfect. Bertha had a beautiful dress with buttons down the back. She was the most beautiful bride we'd ever seen. The reception had the finest food in the country. And it was amazing. I was really happy for Bertha that she found someone, especially considering the circumstances.
These circumstances would end up turning this love story into a fatal catastrophe. It was found that Rochester went into his marriage blindly and ended up marrying a mad woman. So, Mr. Rochester, did you ever even love Bertha?
I found her a fine woman, tall, dark, majestic. She flattered me. All the men admire her and envy me. I was dazzled, stimulated. My senses were excited, and being ignorant, raw, and inexperienced, I thought I loved her, but I seldom saw her alone, and we had very little private conversation.
So, it wasn't an arranged marriage?
My father said nothing about her money, but he told me Miss Mason was the boast of Spanish Town. Her relatives encouraged me, competitors piked me. She allured me. A marriage was achieved almost before I knew where I was. Oh, I have no respect for that act! An agony of inward contempt masters me. I've never loved, I never esteemed. I did not even know her. I was not sure of the existence of one virtue in her nature. I had marked neither modesty nor benevolence nor candor nor refinement in her mind or manners. And I married her, gross, groveling, mole-eyed blockhead that I was! Ah!
So you thought you were too good for her at first? This seemed like a good marriage and that you were happy. What happened? What did you find out?
I found her to be mad. There were vile discoveries, but except for the treachery of containment, I should have made them no subject of reproach to my wife, even when I found her nature wholly alien to me, her tastes obnoxious to me, her cast of mind common, low, narrow, and singularly incapable of being led to anything higher, expanded to anything larger, when I found that I could not pass a single evening, nor even a single hour of the day with her in comfort, that kindly conversation could not be sustained between us, because when at whatever topic I started, immediately received from her a turn at once coarse and trite, perverse and imbecile, when I perceived that I should never have a quiet or settled household, because no servant would hear the continued outbreaks of her violence and unreasonable temper, or the vexation of her absurd, contradictory, exacting orders. Even then I restrained myself. I eschewed upbraiding, I curtailed remonstrance, I tried to devour my repentance and disgust in secret. I repressed this deep antipathy I felt.
What was the incentive to move her from her family, where you would have help taking care of her?
You must know. I lived with that woman upstairs 4 years, and before that time she had tried indeed. Her character ripened and developed with frightful rapidity. Her voices sprang up fast and rank. They were so strong only cruelty could check them. And I would not use cruelty. What a pygmy intellect she had, and what giant propensities. How fearful were the curses those propensities entailed on me. Bertha Mason, the true daughter of an infamous mother, dragged me through all the hideous and degrading agonies which must attend a man bound to a wife at once impotent and unchaste.
Mr. Mason, did you feel that your sister, Bertha, really loved Rochester, or was that a result of the arranged marriage?
Bertha was madly in love with Edward, and at the beginning it seemed like Edward was madly in love with her, but he was really only in love with the idea of her. He wasn't really ready for a real relationship yet. He didn't know how to work through problems with his wife.
How did you feel when you found out that Rochester was married?
I was shocked. I felt as if Edward had betrayed me. All I was a mistress to him. I was sad because the hope of marrying him disappeared in an instant. But after I had heard his side of the story, I realized that it may not be all that it seemed at first glance. She made his life a hell on earth, and I began to empathize with him in the impossible predicament he was in.
Was the way in which Bertha was treated fair in your opinion?
Sire, Rochester is a good man with good intentions, paid me good money for taking care of Bertha. I can attest to the fact that she had violent outbursts and very violent lashings out at people, and I was the only one who had contact with her for many years.
When I at last got to Thornfield and saw her in that 3-story building, locked in what 10 years now has become a beast's den, I had trouble finding an attendant for her, as it was necessary to select one on whose fidelity dependence could be met. At last I hired Grace Poole from the Grimsby retreat. She and the surgeon, Carter, are the only two I've ever admitted to my confidence. Grace has, on the whole, proved a good keeper, though owing partly to a fault of her own, of which it appears nothing can cure her, and which is indecent to harassing her profession, her vigilance has been more than once lulled and baffled.
Was it a good idea to lock Bertha away?
I remember the day Mr. Rochester asked me to move in and take care of Bertha. I can still remember his exact words when describing why he did what he did. It is not known what a sullied name he bears, nor what a filthy burden is bound to him. He decided to take the maniac with him to England, confine her with due attendance and precautions at Thornfield. And I would like to emphasize that he did make sure that she was well taken care of. He made sure that she was cared for as her condition demanded, and that he had done all that God and humanity required of him. Now that I think about it, though, he did seem kind of harsh. And I can remember him saying, "Let her identity, her connection with yourself, be buried in oblivion. You are bound to impart no living being." Severing his ties like that, it may have been too sudden for Bertha.
Are you saying that Edward didn't think he would have consequences for his actions?
I'm saying that he knew and that he didn't care.
Did you ever see how Edward treated her?
I was appalled. I came to visit her, and she was being treated like a dog, not like a human being. Grace Poole wasn't a sufficient caretaker, and no one can live off the companionship of one person alone. That would make any sane person go mad. He treated her like trash. Rochester was not taking good care of her. What Bertha needed was love, not harm and hatred and abandonment from him.
So you're saying that Rochester caused her to go mad?
I fully believe he was the sole cause of her downfall. He drove her to do things she otherwise would not have done. What she needed was love and companionship, and I'm so ashamed that I allowed her to be treated like this for so long.
What was Bertha like when you guys were kids?
She was so full of life. One of the happiest people I ever knew. Her laugh was so contagious. Just thinking about it now makes me smile. She was so ready for a real relationship with like a man and like having kids and just living such a happy life, like such a fantasy-filled princessy life. And when she met Rochester, she thought all of that was going to change and happen for the better. But Mr. Rochester is still a child himself, so that obviously never happened. While Master Rochester's intentions might have been pure, I can attest to the fact that her condition only got worse as time went by being locked up in the attic. I could tell that the loneliness was driving her mad. She was by no means gentle when we first met her, but we couldn't have imagined her setting fire to Rochester's bed.
She did the most unimaginable atrocities. I knew that while she lived, I could never be a husband of another and better wife, and though 5 years my senior, her family and her father had lied to me, even in the particular of her age. She was likely to live as long as I, as robust in frame as she was infirm in mind. Thus, at the age of 26, I was hopeless. She couldn't give me the love I wanted. I was driven to the breaking point. I needed it to end. I almost ended my life so I could be free of her. I wanted to break free of her and go home to God. I meant to shoot myself. I had a pistol to my head, and I entertained the thought for a moment. Momentarily, I wanted self-destruction, but I allowed the thought to pass in a second.
You wanted to remarry her because you found out that you couldn't love her. But how did you become okay with it? Morally? How did it not feel like you were cheating?
I had determined and was convinced that I could and ought to remarry. It was not my original intention to deceive. I meant to tell my tale plainly and make proposals openly, and it appeared to me so absolutely rational that I should be considered free to love and be loved. I never doubted some woman might be found willing and able to understand my case and accept me, in spite of the curse with which I was burdened. And you must know, because people seem to forget this, Bertha was not a good person. She did nothing but wreak havoc on my life day in and day out. She is both cunning and malignant. She has never failed to take advantage of her guardian's temporary lapses, once to secrete the knife with which she stabbed her brother. She perpetrated the attempt to burn me in my bed, paid that ghastly visit to Jane. I thank Providence, who watched over Jane, that she then spent her fury on your wedding peril, which perhaps brought back vague reminiscences of her own bridal days, but on what might have happened I cannot endure to reflect. And the most reckless, selfish, and dangerous of them all, she set fire to my inheritance, my beautiful mansion. I lost everything.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that the time she committed suicide?
Yes.
And you feel no responsibility whatsoever?
The lunatic had it coming. She didn't need to be alive anymore, but I in no way encouraged her or led her to her death. She was crazy. How am I supposed to understand the mind of a crazy woman?
I see. But isn't that a bit harsh?
It's realistic.
Wow, that interview with Rochester was harrowing and harsh. Wait till you see what we have next. Wow, it is truly an honor to meet the ghost of Bertha. I appreciate you taking the time away from your death duties to come talk to us about your true story and your harrowing experience.
It is my pleasure. I truly feel like I need to tell my side of the story.
First, I want to clarify that this is the first time that the ghost of Bertha is speaking out about her experience, and because she's a ghost and is no longer human, she's not allowed to speak for herself in court. Court by law, page 56, subsection C. So this is the first time Ghost of Bertha is actually being allowed to defend herself.
This is all true.
Before we start with your interview, I would like to play a clip from an interview that we've had with a professional psychologist who specializes in treatments for people with mental disorders.
You see, Jeannie, after she was chained to her toilet, started to take on many of the symptoms that you would expect from somebody that had this kind of treatment. She struggled to speak. She struggled to walk. She, in fact, clawed at the different walls in the bathroom. In many ways, she did resort back to her animal ways, which, if I recall from the book Jane Eyre, is very similar to what Bertha Mason did. You see, she was a normal person. This was not a mental illness, but when given the conditions, this is the result. Tragic tale.
Do you truly believe that Rochester turned you mad?
Yes, I was mistreated beyond epic proportions while living at Thornfield. I lived a perfectly happy life in Jamaica, but when Rochester locked me away, I grew mad. Of course, I had a family history of this illness, but Edward only sped up the progression. My life was cut short because Edward felt he could not love me, even though I treated him best I could. I cared for him deeply and was the perfect wife to him.
Was the death of your sister a suicide or a murder?
The death of my sister was a great tragedy, and it was in fact a murder by Edward Rochester because he drove her to do things that she would not otherwise have done. He fully murdered her, and I miss her tremendously, and I wish I had had the chance to say goodbye.
Were you ever truly in love with Rochester?
It was an arranged marriage, but I did feel more compassion for him than any of the other suitors.
We have been told by multiple sources that you tried to burn Rochester, you bit your own brother, you ripped Jane's veil, you traumatized Jane, and ultimately burned Thornfield. How can you defend yourself with all these atrocities are so obvious?
I recognize the facts that I was mentally ill, but I was mistreated, which I believe led to these events become more and more severe and more common.
What started out as the ultimate fairy tale ended up in being a painful and harrowing catastrophe. But tonight, I leave you all with the encompassing question. Do you think that Rochester should have been convicted for mistreatment, or do you agree that she was too crazy for you to handle? That is all I have for you tonight. This is Kashish Singh on Eyreline. Tune in back next week to hear all about the death or murder, depending on your situation, of Uncle Eyre. Was he murdered for his money, or was it just a fatal accident? Good night.